taste of Old Colony history. For today's recipes, we went back into the Old Colony History Museum's archives to take a look at some more menus from the city's most popular restaurants. And today's dishes come from the Transfer Restaurant. For our entree, we're gonna have chicken croquettes served with green peas. For dessert, we're having ice cream soda. I'm gonna make mine chocolate, but I'll show you ways to completely customize the flavors to make your favorite sweet treat. Let's get to it. Here are the ingredients for the chicken croquettes. We'll need 2½ cups of cooked chopped chicken, 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 stalks of celery, finely chopped, half an onion, finely chopped, half a teaspoon salt, 1/4 teaspoon black pepper, 1/4 teaspoon thyme, 1/4 teaspoon cayenne pepper, 1/4 teaspoon nutmeg, a tablespoon of parsley, 2 cloves of minced garlic, and then a cup of all-purpose flour, a cup of milk, and a cup of chicken broth. Cancel the chicken broth, that goes for the gravy. So these are the ingredients that are gonna make up the croquettes themselves. Later, once they've chilled, we'll do our breading station and frying. So for tools, you'll need a knife to chop all those celery stalks and onion up, as well as our chicken. We need to get that into some smaller pieces. And you'll need a measuring cup and a couple measuring spoons as well. So now we're gonna prepare all our ingredients to be cooked. So we just have to do some chopping. First, I'm gonna cut 2 tablespoons of butter off the rest of the stick. This I'm just gonna pop right into the skillet because we'll melt this down and use it to cook all the vegetables in. So it's gonna go right there. Then I'm gonna finely chop my celery, my onion, chop up some of this parsley. We only need about 2 tablespoons of that, and then we'll get it cooking. Diced up our celery. It's fairly small, but we still want it to have some texture to it. So it's not teeny tiny, but it's pretty good. And next we'll do half our onion. Alright, so we've got our onions and celery all diced up. We're gonna melt this butter down and get these cooking. And then I'll chop up my chicken while these are cooking down. Let the butter get nice and melty in this pan. The next thing I'm gonna do, switch it up a little bit. We're gonna measure out all our seasonings. So we need a few measuring spoons for these. So we need our thyme, nutmeg, cayenne, salt, and pepper for now. First, we're gonna do half a teaspoon of salt, followed by a 1/4 teaspoon of our black pepper, 1/4 teaspoon of our dried thyme, 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne. There we go. And we also need a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Now our butter has melted. Butter's melted. We're gonna get these veggies in. We're also gonna add our garlic to this. So this calls for 2 cloves of minced garlic, but I have Lazy Man's minced garlic, and I'm gonna use a tablespoon. Smells wonderful already. And we do need to chop up about 2.5 cups of our cooked chicken. So this is a great way to use up leftover chicken. I cooked this the other night. I'm just gonna really finely, or not finely, I'm going to roughly chop this chicken. This was bone-in, skin-on chicken that I cooked a few nights ago, and I removed the bones before I put it in the fridge. Alright, so we've got our celery, onions, and garlic all hanging out. To this, I'm going to add our 2.5 cups of chopped chicken, as well as those seasonings we measured out. Just a nice mix. Just needs a couple minutes in the pan all together. Get all the flavors nicely combined with each other. Looks pretty good. The veggies are softened but not completely soft, so they still have a little bite to them. And we're going to remove this from the heat and let it cool down before we add our next ingredients. Alright, so our mixture of chicken, celery, onions, garlic, and other seasonings has cooled. So now we're going to add our breadcrumb, egg, and milk. That will all help bind this together. So I used fresh parsley, so I'm going to add that now as our last seasoning. If you use dry, you could add it when we did all the others so that it all cooks together. Need 1 cup of milk, 1 beaten egg, 2 tablespoons of plain breadcrumb. Mix this all together. Like a lot of milk to me. So I'm going to add some more breadcrumb and we'll soak that milk up. Another tablespoon of breadcrumb. See how that does. We're just going to keep going until this is, until the texture is a little better and holds together a little more. So we'll let this chill in the fridge for about a half an hour and see how it firms up. We just don't want these croquettes to fall apart. Make sure it's thoroughly combined, and then I'll put a cover on it and let it hang out in the fridge for, like I said, about a half an hour. This is our breading station for our croquettes. So we have plain flour, couple beaten eggs, and then a mix of panko and regular unseasoned breadcrumbs. All right, so our croquette mixture got to chill in the fridge for about a half an hour, and I set up all my breading stations here. So I figured out that we were only supposed to use a few tablespoons of milk in this mixture, which is why I had to add so many more breadcrumbs, because that cup of milk was for our gravy. So when you are making this, do not use as much milk as I did, or you'll have to use as much breadcrumb as I did. But it got a pretty good texture, and it should stay together. So what we're gonna do is roll these into about ping pong sized balls, roll them in the flour, then the egg, then the breadcrumb, and then we'll put them on our baking sheet and let them chill in the fridge for another half an hour to let them set up, and then we'll fry them. Get a little bit of our mixture, roll it around into the flour. Try to handle these as little as possible. Flour, egg, and breadcrumb. And you do kind of want to press that breadcrumb into the croquette so it stays on nicely. All right. First one done. Keep going until we run out of mix. We should have about 2 dozen that size. last one, you can see that the texture of my chicken mixture definitely did not make this easy, but what I found is that sort of reshaping them between steps is helpful. And I'm making them a little larger, just so they're a little easier to work with. But luckily, as far as cooking consistency, since everything in these is already cooked, like our chicken and everything, we really just have to worry about frying them to the point where they get nice and crispy. We don't have to worry about cooking them through. So sort of reshaping these as I do each step, tossing it back and forth between my hands to keep it in that ball shape. And as you can see, I got much larger as I went along. They were a bit easier to work with. I'm going to clean up and show you a bit more. All right, so here you can see my croquettes are all different sizes. But like I said, we don't have to worry about consistent cooking through because everything is already cooked. So I started with tiny ones, and they were just really challenging. So I made them a bit larger so I didn't have to do quite so many. Because my mixture was definitely too wet. So please do yourself a favor, use less milk and use, I would say even more breadcrumb in the mixture if you do end up using too much milk. The breadcrumb will help to soak those up. So I'm gonna put these in the fridge to chill for a while and let them firm up a bit more since they've been out and warm again. And I'll take them out of the fridge in batches as we fry so that they stay as cool as possible. But I think these are more meal size anyway. These would be more like an appetizer. So we'll see how this goes when it's time to fry. All right, it's time to prepare our skillet to fry our croquettes. So we have some neutral oil. I'm using canola, and we'll need about 2 inches in the bottom of our skillet. All right, so we'll get this turned on. Heating up. These are the ingredients we will need for the gravy that goes with the croquettes. So we'll need 3 tablespoons of butter, 3 tablespoons of flour, 1/4 teaspoon thyme, 2 cups of chicken broth, and salt and pepper to taste. So you'll need a wet measure, you need a tablespoon and 1/4 teaspoon, as well as sauce pot and a whisk. So to make our gravy, we're going to start by melting our butter over medium-low heat. We need 3 tablespoons butter. Let that melt, and then we'll slowly start adding our 3 tablespoons of flour to this. While we're waiting for that to melt, we'll measure out our 2 cups of chicken stock that we're going to need. Forgot an ingredient. We also need milk. Butter's just about completely melted. We'll start adding our tablespoons of flour one at a time and whisking them to combine. Boiling away on the back burner are some potatoes that I'm going to mash to serve alongside this. All right, so that flour is nicely combined. Slowly add in our chicken stock. And then a cup of milk. So we want to keep stirring the gravy until it thickens up. I think it's going to be a while. Add in our salt and pepper and our thyme. about a quarter teaspoon. Let that gravy go, stirring every once in a while. And while that cooks and starts to thicken up, our oil is nice and hot next door. So we're gonna start frying our croquettes. So I've got our croquettes here that we're chilling in the fridge. I'm gonna start frying them in batches. We wanna make sure there's space in between so they can get nice and crispy. And we'll start cooking them up. Remember, these are fully cooked already, so we're just getting them hot and crispy. So I'll do a few at a time and then pull them out and put them on my lined cooling rack. My smaller ones first. First ones look pretty golden already. This oil might be too hot. So that's the first round. Give my gravy another stir. Crank the temperature up a few times to get this thickened because it was definitely too low before. Next round of croquettes. While these are frying up, I'm going to taste test one of our first ones. Let it cool for a few minutes anyway. Ooh, nice juicy chicken inside. Looks pretty awesome. These are delicious. They're like little bites of fried chicken salad. Mm-hmm. Gravy came up to a boil while we were doing that. Just turned it down to a simmer. We'll let it hang out there for a little while. So I just did a count. I got 15. So if they were a little bit smaller, we would have gotten the full 24. But like I said, I think these are going to be a good size to have a few for dinner anyway. The last of the croquettes to be cooked. Coming out. And I just put on to boil some peas that are going to be our other side dish to these croquettes. So, next up, we will plate and serve. Recipe reaction time. We're talking about our chicken croquettes and green peas that we also served with mashed potato. So these, I would call them deliciously challenging. The recipe called for a lot more liquid than it probably actually needed. I found myself having to balance it out by adding in extra breadcrumb to thicken up the actual croquette batter, I guess you could say. And the gravy never quite came together as a nice thick gravy. It was a very thin, milky consistency. That said, the flavors were all fantastic. In the croquettes themselves, I was really curious how the mix of thyme and nutmeg and cayenne was all gonna come together, but it was actually really tasty. I loved it. They remind me of fancy little fried chicken salad bites. And the gravy, the flavor of the gravy was good too. It was a nice little topping. We did top the croquettes with it, but like I said, it just never quite came together. So would I make these again? Absolutely. I would use some of the lessons that I learned with those liquids, but they're definitely worth making, and you can make them in batches, make them for a crowd. They reheat in an oven or an air fryer really well. So I do highly recommend you try making your own. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on our next Taste of Old Colony History.